Hello to all the wonderful listeners of Sci-Fi Stories. We want to be completely honest with you that YouTube has recently disabled our channel monetization, leaving us with zero budget to keep operating. If you find today's story engaging, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hard-working team to cover their living expenses and continue creating more amazing stories for you. You can easily donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or by clicking the PayPal link provided in the video description or the comment section. The stench of oxidized metal, leaking coolant, and rotting synthetic flesh hung heavy in Sector 4. This was the absolute lowest underbelly of the asteroid belt, a decaying underground waste processing station that barely maintained its artificial gravity and atmospheric pressure. Andrew Arroyo kept his head down, the high collar of his grease-stained jacket pulled up tightly against the biting, chemical chill of the giant ventilation shafts. Once a highly paid and utterly ruthless military mercenary, he had spent the past 5 long years burying his bloody history beneath layers of grime and perfect anonymity in this god-forsaken floating scrap heap. Survival in a place like this meant keeping your eyes firmly fixed on your own boots and ignoring everything that did not directly keep your lungs breathing and your heart pumping. But the station possessed a beating, malignant heart of pure rot, and tonight, Andrew had wandered dangerously close to it. The black market of Sector 4 was a brutal, sprawling labyrinth of rusted cargo shipping containers, jury-rigged catwalks, and flickering neon tubes that buzzed like dying insects. Here, absolutely anything could be bought, and absolutely anyone could be sold. The air was thick with the smoke of cheap stimulants and the low rumble of illicit negotiations. He paused near a rusted metal railing, his attention involuntarily caught by a massive commotion down below. A vicious crowd of desperate scavengers, rogue alien traders, and heavily augmented cybernetic thugs had gathered eagerly around a makeshift auction block constructed from crushed engine cowlings. The auctioneer, a hulking brute heavily modified with a terrifying mechanical jaw and hydraulic arms, barked exorbitant prices into the foul air. Andrew turned his back, ready to walk away and return to his miserable, safe existence, when the heavy canvas tarp covering the main, reinforced cage was violently yanked off. Inside the cold iron cage knelt a girl. She possessed a perfectly human silhouette, delicate and trembling, yet her skin radiated a faint, ethereal luminescence. It pulsed softly, like a dying star trapped in the immense gloom of the station. She wore absolutely nothing, her fragile form exposed to the harsh, artificial lights, save for the heavy, brutal iron cuffs, biting deeply into the flesh of her wrists and ankles. The terrifying auctioneer slammed a crackling plasma stun baton against the metal bars, shouting enthusiastically about her pristine, uncontaminated biological materials and the unimaginable rarity of her glowing internal organs. She was being auctioned alive, destined to be carved up piece by bloody piece and distributed to the highest bidders in the room. The monstrous crowd roared with hungry, predatory approval. Hearing the terrifying noise, the glowing girl slowly raised her head through the thick, toxic smoke and the sea of grotesque, greedy faces. Her impossibly bright, terrified eyes locked directly onto Andrew standing high up on the catwalk. "Sold for meat. Human. Hold me. Use me. But get me out of here." The agonizing voice exploded directly inside his brain. Andrew physically staggered backward, his hands instinctively clutching his temples. The raw telepathic connection was so violently intense it tasted like old copper and blood on his tongue. He did not just hear her words. He saw into her mind, experiencing a chaotic, suffocating storm of sheer agony and desperate, pathetic hope. She was begging him, in a room filled with hundreds of monsters, Her mind had reached out to the one man who had spent 5 years trying to become nothing. For 5 grueling years. Andrew had lived by one unbreakable rule: never get involved in someone else's misery. He had silently ignored public executions. He had ignored mass starvation. He had ignored the endless, grinding cruelty of the asteroid belt. But as he looked down at the trembling, glowing girl about to be viciously butchered for spare medical parts, a deeply buried, righteous instinct violently tore through his carefully constructed wall of apathy. He could not simply walk away. Not tonight. Not from her. Andrew reached deep into the concealed inside pocket of his heavy jacket. His calloused fingers wrapped around a cold, metallic cylinder. A highly illegal, custom-built electromagnetic jammer he had painstakingly cobbled together from salvaged military drone parts. He twisted the safety cap off, primed the volatile explosive charge, and forcefully tossed it straight down into the dead center of the packed auction pit. The heavy device hit the grated metal floor with a sharp, echoing clang. Half a second later, a massive, invisible pulse of pure blue energy ripped outwards through the cavernous market. Every single flickering neon light, every illegal cybernetic ocular implant, and every automated plasma rifle in a 50-yard radius instantly short-circuited with a shower of sparks. Total, suffocating, pitch-black darkness crashed down on the entire market. Absolute panic instantly erupted. Screams of terror, shouts of furious anger, and the chaotic sounds of bodies crashing into each other filled the freezing air. Andrew did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. He dropped silently from the high catwalk, landing perfectly on the metal floor amidst the screaming chaos. Decades of ingrained military muscle memory completely took over his body. He moved through the absolute pitch blackness, like a hunting ghost, perfectly aware of his spatial surroundings. The first heavily armored guard standing near the cage swung a blind, panicked punch into the darkness. Andrew easily deflected the clumsy blow, stepped cleanly inside the guard's physical reach, and drove a vicious, paralyzing strike directly into the man's throat. The guard collapsed like a stone without making a single sound. The second guard desperately raised a dead, useless energy rifle to use as a crude club. Andrew grabbed the hot barrel, twisted it violently to shatter the man's balance, and delivered a bone-crushing knee strike directly to his exposed ribs, immediately following up with a heavy, lethal elbow strike to the temple. The third guard, realizing what was happening, lunged forward wildly with a serrated combat knife. Andrew caught the attacking wrist, brutally hyperextended the joint until the bones snapped loudly, and slammed the heavy iron lock of the cage directly into the man's unprotected face. 3 highly trained elite guards completely neutralized in under 10 seconds. Andrew quickly felt for the cold metal bars of the cage door. He ripped the violently damaged locking mechanism away and reached his hands inside the dark enclosure. His rough fingers found her bare, glowing arm. Her skin felt freezing cold to the touch, yet it hummed with an intoxicating, strange bioelectrical energy. "We are leaving," Andrew whispered harshly into the dark. He forcefully pulled her up. She felt incredibly light, almost dangerously fragile. But she scrambled desperately to her bare feet, her cold hands clinging tightly to his strong arm. Andrew dragged her forcefully out of the rusted cage and began shoving his way ruthlessly through the blindly thrashing, screaming crowd. He knew the hidden structural layout of this decaying waste station far better than anyone else alive. He led her rapidly away from the chaotic market center, sprinting wildly down a narrow, dripping service corridor until they finally reached a massive, heavy iron maintenance grate bolted to the wall. With a violent, adrenaline-fueled heave, Andrew ripped the thick metal grate completely off the wall. "Get in," he ordered firmly. She crawled quickly into the dark, gaping maw of the station's massive, labyrinthine ventilation maze. Andrew slipped into the narrow shaft right behind her, using all his remaining strength to drag the heavy metal grate back into its proper place, just as the dull, red backup emergency lights of the black market finally flared to life. The crimson light illuminated the empty iron cage and the bleeding bodies of the fallen guards. They were now completely surrounded by incredibly hostile territory, hunted by the worst scum in the galaxy. But for now, they were safely swallowed by the deep, silent shadows of the vents. The descent felt endless. Andrew navigated the treacherous vertical drops of the station's deepest ventilation shafts, pushing deeper into the forbidden zones, where even the automated maintenance drones refused to go. They finally dropped into Sector 9, the abandoned radioactive waste containment level. The air here was incredibly heavy, tasting distinctively of metallic ash and stale ozone. High above them, the muffled, rhythmic thud of heavy boots echoed through the grated ceilings. The bounty hunters were tearing the upper levels apart, but they would not dare enter this toxic graveyard without specialized heavy shielding. Andrew leaned against a massive, dormant cooling tower, his chest heaving as he tried to regulate his breathing and calm his racing pulse. He reached into his belt and cracked a low, light chemical stick, casting a sickly green pallor over the cavernous, trash-filled room. He turned to inspect the girl he had just dragged through hell. She sat huddled on a pile of discarded titanium plating, shivering slightly in the freezing dampness. The brutal iron cuffs from the market had left deep, bloody lacerations on her fragile wrists and ankles, exposing raw tissue. But, as Andrew watched, his hardened eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated disbelief. The faint, ethereal glow beneath her skin suddenly intensified, concentrating brightly around the gruesome wounds. The torn, bloody flesh began to knit together, muscle fibers weaving and repairing themselves at an impossible, terrifying speed. Within 20 seconds, the deep gashes closed completely, leaving behind only smooth, unblemished skin that radiated a soft, pulsing light. "My name is Lyra," she spoke. Her voice was no longer a telepathic scream inside his head, but a quiet, melodic sound that echoed strangely in the silent cavern. Andrew kept his right hand resting cautiously on the grip of his heavy blaster. He did not relax his rigid posture. "What exactly are you? Nobody heals like that. Not even with top-tier military-grade cybernetics." Lyra reached out, her delicate fingers resting gently against the rusted hull of a discarded transit pod. A subtle, low-frequency hum vibrated through the cold air. "My people do not consume biological sustenance the way yours do. We draw the fundamental resonance of life directly from raw elements, metal, specifically. We can synthesize physical energy and instantaneous cellular regeneration from the kinetic and magnetic memory trapped within discarded alloys. This place, filled with dead machines and forgotten iron, is like a sanctuary of abundant life for me." Andrew processed the unbelievable information with the cold, calculating mind of a former soldier, a biological entity capable of infinite cellular regeneration by simply touching scrap metal. She was not just a rare medical curiosity. She was the absolute holy grail of bioengineering. No wonder the black market auctioneer had been screaming about her internal organs. She was a living, breathing fountain of youth. And every corporate butcher in the galaxy would slaughter entire planetary colonies to get their hands on her genome. Lyra stood up gracefully, her bare feet making absolutely no sound on the metal-grated floor. She walked slowly toward him, her glowing eyes locking onto his with an unnerving, ancient intensity. She suddenly dropped to her knees, placing her hands flat on the floor in front of his dirty boots, bowing her head in a gesture of profound submission. "You stepped into the dark when everyone else turned away," Lyra said softly, her voice filled with heavy reverence. "You risked your existence to preserve mine. By the ancient laws of my bloodline, I forged the eternal bond of the life debt. My breath is your breath. My strength is your strength. I swear absolute, unbreakable loyalty to you, Andrew Arroyo, until the stars burn out, and this sacred debt is fully repaid." The solemn weight of her words hung heavily in the toxic air, contrasting sharply with the grim reality of their situation. Andrew stared down at her, his expression hardening into a mask of pure, cynical stone. He had seen enough blind loyalty during the corporate wars to know it only ever ended in a shallow, unmarked grave. "Get up," Andrew commanded coldly. He took a deliberate step backward, physically rejecting the space between them and the emotional weight she was trying to impose. "I do not want your loyalty. I do not want a sacred life debt. I do not want anything to do with whatever ancient religion you follow. I saved you because I had a momentary stupid lapse in judgment. That is it. We are going to make our way to the secondary transit docks on level 3. I will put you on an anonymous smuggling freighter headed for the Outer Rim. Once those cargo doors close, we are completely done. Do not expect anything else from me." Lyra slowly rose to her feet. Her expression remained unreadable, but a flicker of deep, silent sorrow crossed her luminous eyes. She did not argue. She simply nodded once. Andrew turned his attention away from her, focusing on a battered, flickering security terminal mounted on the concrete wall nearby. He needed to tap into the station's internal security feed to map a safe route up to the transit docks. He pulled a loose bypass cable from his gear and spliced it into his wrist port, bypassing the ancient security protocols with practiced, mechanical ease. The cracked screen sparked to life, flooding the dim corner with harsh, blue light. He expected to see the standard bounty hunter alerts, maybe a crude sketch of his face, circulated by the local smuggler cartels demanding retribution for the disrupted auction. Instead, the screen cleared to reveal a massive, high-definition, rotating three-dimensional hologram of his own face. It was not a recent image captured by the station cameras, but a highly classified, pristine military file photo from his active duty days. Andrew felt the blood turn to absolute ice in his veins. His combat instincts screamed in sudden, overwhelming alarm. Below his face, glaring in bright crimson text, was a bounty. It was not 50,000 credits. It was not even 500,000 credits. The reward offered for his immediate capture, alive or dead, was 10 million credits. But it was the corporate logo pulsing slowly at the very bottom of the screen that made his breathing stop entirely. It was a perfectly symmetrical, silver double helix. The universally dreaded insignia of the Omnicorp Medical Technologies conglomerate, the supreme, untouchable corporate power that practically owned the core worlds. The low-level black market thugs were not hunting him. The most powerful, terrifying corporate entity in the known galaxy had just declared open season on his head. The silver double helix of Omnicorp rotated smoothly on the cracked screen. Andrew reached up, his fingers instinctively tracing the long, thick scar at the base of his neck. It was the entry point for the classified neural and biomechanical enhancements he received during his final tour of duty over a decade ago. He had always been told those mandatory surgeries were experimental battlefield trauma protocols. Now, staring at the corporate logo that owned the bounty on his head, the terrifying pieces began snapping into a cold, logical, and deeply sinister puzzle. Omnicorp had not just fixed him. They had tampered with him. Lyra stepped closer, the soft ambient glow of her skin casting long, strange shadows across the rusted bulkheads. She saw the sudden, rigid tension in his shoulders and the cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. Without asking for permission, she reached out and pressed her cool, luminous fingers against his temples. Andrew tried to pull away, but a sudden rush of vivid, suppressed memories slammed into his conscious mind. He was back on a sterile steel operating table, blinding surgical lights, the sharp, clinical smell of synthetic antiseptics, faceless surgeons wearing Omnicorp uniforms whispering about solvent extraction and cellular binding agents. Lyra gasped loudly, breaking the connection as she stumbled backward. Her eyes were wide with a horror that transcended physical fear. "I saw it," Lyra whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of absolute dread and sickening realization. "I saw the chemical equations in those fragmented memories of yours. The things those doctors were discussing, they are not just building advanced prosthetics. Andrew, they are manipulating the fundamental building blocks of human aging." She wrapped her arms around herself, the light beneath her skin dimming as if suffocated by the heavy, dark truth. "My people," she continued, her voice breaking, "our blood possesses the unique capacity to synthesize raw energy. Your medical corporation discovered that if they use our blood as a biological solvent, they can perfectly bind artificial telomeres to human DNA. They are not hunting me for spare organs to save dying patients. They are butchering my race to refine a permanent immortality serum. An eternity elixir reserved exclusively for your ruling elite, the trillionaires and supreme politicians who govern the core worlds." Andrew clenched his fists until his knuckles turned completely white. A massive, horrific political conspiracy was unfolding right in this abandoned, radioactive basement. Humanity's absolute apex predators were farming her peaceful species to cheat death forever. Before Andrew could vocalize his disgust, the ground beneath their boots shuddered violently. A deafening, mechanical groan echoed through the station's massive structural pillars. On the hacked terminal, a cascade of red warning alerts flooded the screen. "Total system lockdown," Andrew muttered, his eyes scanning the rapidly scrolling data. The central artificial intelligence just sealed every blast door, every hangar bay, and every waste chute. "We are permanently boxed in." He switched the terminal feed to the external, long-range sensors. Outside the station, in the cold vacuum of space, the darkness was suddenly illuminated by dozens of massive, sleek corporate warships dropping out of hyperspace. They formed an impenetrable, heavily armed blockade around the entire asteroid facility. Nobody was getting in, and absolutely nobody was getting out. They were trapped in a floating steel coffin. Andrew cursed bitterly. There was only one desperate option left. He accessed a deeply buried, encrypted communication frequency on his wrist gauntlet. He had an old squad mate, a man named Jax, who served with him during the corporate wars and currently worked as a high-level environmental engineer on this very station. Jax knew the station's hidden architecture better than the central computer itself. Andrew transmitted a silent, heavily coded text burst, begging for the forgotten ventilation schematics that led directly to the executive VIP docking bays. It was an incredibly reckless gamble, but they had zero alternatives. The response ping indicated Jax had received the message and told Andrew to wait at their current coordinates while he bypassed the corporate firewalls to send the data. The oppressive silence of the radioactive vault returned. The frantic, adrenaline-fueled pace of their escape finally caught up with them. Andrew slid down the cold concrete wall, resting his heavy rifle across his knees. Lyra sat carefully opposite him, the faint light of her skin providing the only illumination in the suffocating darkness. "I had a squad once," Andrew said quietly, his voice hollow. "Men I considered brothers. Omnicorp treated us like disposable assets, sent us into meat grinders. When they were done with us, they discarded the survivors. I lost my entire humanity on those battlefields, piece by bloody piece, until there was nothing left but a ghost hiding in the trash." Lyra looked at him, her eyes reflecting centuries of inherited sorrow. "And my people hid in the deepest nebulae, praying the universe would simply forget we existed. But greed always finds a way. I watched corporate hunting ships burn our sanctuaries to ash. I watched them herd my family into harvesting pods. We both carry the weight of ghosts. Andrew, in that quiet, dark abyss, the immense, invisible walls between the cynical human mercenary and the hunted luminescent being completely crumbled. A profound, silent bond of shared trauma and mutual understanding anchored them together. For the first time in 5 years, Andrew did not feel entirely alone in the galaxy. Suddenly, a blinding flash of pure white light instantly vaporized the heavy steel door of their hideout. The catastrophic shockwave threw Andrew violently across the room. Debris and twisted metal rained down in the thick, choking smoke, through the ringing in his ears. Andrew struggled to raise his weapon. Heavy, tactical boots crunched over the smoking rubble. Out of the dust, a squad of heavily armored Omnicorp death commandos stepped into the vault, their lethal laser sights painting red dots across the walls. At the center of the formation stood a man wearing a high-ranking engineering uniform, casually holding a heavy plasma pistol. It was Jax. His old squad mate stared down at the bleeding Andrew with absolutely cold, dead eyes. Jax stepped over a jagged piece of the ruined blast door, casually wiping a speck of ash from his pristine engineering uniform. He looked down at Andrew, who was struggling to push himself up from the debris, and offered a cold, practiced smirk. "Do not look at me with that pathetic, betrayed expression, Drew," Jack said, his voice completely devoid of any former camaraderie. "You know exactly how this miserable universe operates. Loyalty does not buy clean oxygen. It does not buy synthetic sunlight. And it certainly does not buy a permanent, lifetime estate on the absolute most luxurious core planets. I have spent my entire life choking on toxic fumes in this floating garbage dump. Handing you and the alien over buys me an eternity of paradise. It is just basic economics." Andrew spat a mouthful of blood onto the floor, his hand desperately inching toward his dropped weapon. "We bled together. I trusted you, and that was your final tactical error," Jax replied flatly. He raised his heavy plasma pistol and pulled the trigger without a single microsecond of hesitation. A searing bolt of superheated energy struck Andrew squarely in the chest. The blast instantly melted through his reinforced tactical armor, tearing deep into his flesh and cauterizing the wound even as it shattered his ribs. The sheer kinetic force threw him backward. He hit the cold steel wall and slid down into a rapidly expanding pool of his own dark blood. His vision blurred, the edges of the room turning completely black as his lungs struggled uselessly to draw air. Through his fading consciousness, Andrew watched the heavily armed Omnicorp death commandos swarm the room. They completely ignored him, assessing him as a neutralized threat. Instead, they viciously grabbed Lyra. 4 massive soldiers forced her brutally to her knees, locking her glowing arms into heavy magnetic containment restraints. Another commando kicked a heavy metal case open, rapidly assembling a horrifying, portable medical extraction rig. A foot long, thick titanium needle hummed with surgical vibration, designed to punch directly through her spinal column and siphon her rare, glowing fluid right there on the filthy floor. Lyra did not fight the soldiers. Her luminous, terrifyingly wide eyes were locked entirely on Andrew. She watched his chest stop moving. She watched the life rapidly draining from the only creature in the entire galaxy who had shown her an ounce of genuine mercy. Deep within her genetic code, a primal, catastrophic survival instinct that had been suppressed for millennia finally snapped. The ambient temperature in the radioactive vault plummeted instantly to absolute freezing. The soft, gentle glow radiating from Lyra's skin suddenly flared into a blinding, violent nova of pure white energy. The heavy magnetic restraints binding her wrists groaned, then completely shattered into a fine metallic dust. Lyra stood up. She did not raise a hand. She simply cast a look of pure, unadulterated wrath upon the soldiers surrounding her. In less than a single heartbeat, the localized gravity field inside the room violently inverted and multiplied by a factor of 1,000. The Omnicorp commandos did not even have the time to scream. Their state-of-the-art, heavy combat armor instantly imploded. The reinforced titanium plating, the heavy plasma rifles, and the advanced helmets were all simultaneously crushed inward by an invisible, unstoppable crushing weight. Blood sprayed from the microscopic seams of their compressed armor as the elite squad was reduced to jagged, twisted spheres of bloody scrap metal dropping heavily to the floor. Jax stumbled backward, dropping his plasma pistol in sheer, paralyzing horror. The smug, arrogant grin was completely wiped from his face, replaced by the pathetic, weeping terror of a man looking at a god of destruction. He fell heavily to his knees, crawling through the gore of his own escort team, sobbing wildly and begging for his life. "Please," Jax wailed, his voice cracking. "I am sorry they made me do it. Spare me." Lyra walked slowly toward him, her bare feet hovering just a fraction of an inch above the blood-soaked floor. Her face was a mask of cold, divine judgment. She reached out and placed one glowing hand firmly onto Jax's forehead. She did not offer him a single word of forgiveness. With a sharp, agonizing gasp, Jax's body rigidly arched backward. Lyra forcefully ripped the absolute entirety of his biological life energy from his cells. His skin rapidly turned gray. His eyes sank deep into his skull, and within 3 seconds, Jax collapsed into a lifeless, desiccated husk. Lyra immediately turned and rushed to Andrew. She knelt in his pooling blood and pressed both of her hands directly over the massive, gaping plasma wound in his chest. The stolen life energy from the traitor flowed through her and poured forcefully into Andrew's failing body. Andrew gasped violently, his eyes snapping open. The excruciating, burning agony in his chest vanished, replaced by an overwhelming surge of raw, electric vitality. He looked down and saw pristine, newly woven tissue completely closing the fatal hole in his chest. He then looked up at Lyra. The blinding aura around her was slowly fading, but the sheer, apocalyptic magnitude of what she had just done settled heavily into his mind. She was not just a biological battery or a helpless victim. She harbored a dormant, catastrophic power, capable of manipulating the fundamental forces of physics. She could single-handedly threaten the structural integrity of the entire Omnicorp empire. Andrew pushed himself off the floor, grabbing his discarded rifle. His entire perspective violently shifted. They had spent the last 2 hours running, hiding, like terrified prey in the deepest, darkest holes of the station. But looking at the crushed remains of the elite strike team, Andrew realized they were no longer the prey. "We are done running," Andrew said, his voice cold and resolute as he ejected a spent thermal clip and slammed a fresh one into his weapon. "They sealed the blast doors. They locked us in with them. But they just made the biggest mistake in their corporate history. We are not going to the smuggler docks anymore." Lyra looked at him, her eyes burning with a newly awakened, fierce resolve. "Where are we going?" "We are going straight up," Andrew replied, staring at the thick concrete ceiling. "We are going to the Omnicorp Central Command Tower. We are going to tear their entire world apart." The ascent to the peak of the Omnicorp Command Tower felt unnervingly hollow. Andrew kept his weapon raised, expecting heavy resistance behind every sleek, polished corridor. Yet they encountered nothing but empty executive suites and silent, automated security drones. The sheer lack of corporate soldiers should have been the first warning. But the heavy adrenaline pumping through his veins blinded him to the obvious trap. They finally breached the massively reinforced titanium doors of the central mainframe vault. The room was a colossal, freezing cathedral of towering black server racks, pulsating with rhythmic, hypnotic pulses of blue light. This was the dark heart of the corporation, the digital vault containing centuries of classified atrocities, illegal genetic harvesting records, and the full architectural blueprint of their terrifying immortality program. Andrew moved swiftly to the primary terminal, his calloused hands flying across the smooth glass interface with practiced military precision. He initiated a massive data siphon, routing the staggering volume of highly encrypted files directly into a highly secure, portable memory drive he had pulled from his tactical vest. Lyra stood guard near the breached entrance, her glowing eyes scanning the silent, shifting shadows of the server banks. The progress indicator on the massive holographic screen slowly ticked upwards. 80%, 90%, 99%, 100%. The download completed with a soft, melodic chime. Andrew pulled the heavy drive free, a grim, overwhelming sense of triumph washing over his exhausted body. They actually had the undeniable evidence. They possessed the raw data power to shatter the entire corporate empire and expose the truth to the galaxy. "We got it," Andrew said, turning toward Lyra with a rare, genuine smile. "We have everything we need to burn them to the ground." But Lyra was not looking at the heavy vault door. She was staring blankly at her own hands. The ethereal, pulsing light beneath her skin was violently flickering, distorting rapidly as if viewed through a prism of shattered glass. Suddenly, the towering black server racks began to melt into thin air. The solid steel walls rippled like water, violently disturbed by a heavy stone. The freezing temperature of the vault evaporated instantly, replaced by a sterile, perfectly climate-controlled warmth. Andrew staggered backward, his heavy weapon raised instinctively, as the entire physical environment around them dissolved into a grid of pure, blinding white light. The Cathedral of Servers was a complete, fabricated lie. The command tower infiltration was a lie. They were standing dead center in a featureless, heavily shielded containment cell, crafted from an indestructible, transparent polymer. A sharp, rhythmic clapping echoed through the pristine, horrifying space. Standing comfortably on the other side of the thick, transparent wall was a tall, immaculately dressed man. He wore a bespoke, dark suit that cost more than a dozen planetary colonies combined. His face was a mask of perfect, genetically engineered youth, his sharp eyes radiating a terrifying, absolute calm. He was the Supreme Chief Executive Officer of Omnicorp. "A truly spectacular performance," the executive said. His voice piped into the cell through hidden, high-fidelity speakers. "Bravo, Andrew. You executed the infiltration parameters completely flawlessly." Andrew aimed his rifle directly at the man's smug face. But when he tried to violently pull the trigger, his index finger completely refused to move. It was not a physical weapon jam. His brain simply stopped sending the electrical signal to his hand. A sudden, paralyzing coldness gripped the base of his skull, radiating outward from the deep surgical scars on his neck. "Do not bother fighting it, my boy." The executive sighed lightly, casually adjusting his expensive cuffs. "Did you honestly believe you bypassed our state-of-the-art security? Did you truly think you dragged the absolute most valuable biological asset in the known universe through a fully locked-down orbital station purely by your own rugged military skill? Your entire heroic rebellion was a meticulously orchestrated simulation." The executive tapped a sleek, transparent tablet in his hands. "5 years ago, we did not just surgically rebuild your broken body. We fundamentally rewired your entire consciousness. You are a sleeper agent, Andrew, the absolute pinnacle of our covert neural programming division. We desperately needed to test the upper limits of our little alien friend here. We needed to see what kind of catastrophic power she could generate when pushed to the absolute edge of despair. We needed a strong emotional catalyst. So, we remotely activated your dormant rescue protocol." The terrifying truth crashed down on Andrew with the crushing, suffocating weight of a collapsing star. Every single choice he thought he made tonight was a pre-calculated lie. The sudden burst of righteousness at the underground black market, the desperate flight through the toxic vents, the fierce determination to protect her from the strike team. None of it actually belonged to him. His deeply buried righteous instinct was nothing but a string of synthetic corporate code executing a master command. He had not saved Lyra. He had flawlessly, obediently, fetched her for the corporate butchers. And now, the executive smiled warmly, his eyes devoid of any human empathy. The final phase of the behavioral test. We must ensure her emotional bond to you is absolute, making her fully compliant for the extensive extraction process. Execute her, Andrew. Just a fatal shot directly to the heart. We only need her brain and spinal fluid intact anyway. A catastrophic, agonizing scream ripped fiercely from Andrew's throat. His own arms, entirely hijacked by the malicious corporate software deeply embedded in his central nervous system, slowly raised the heavy plasma rifle and aimed it squarely at Lyra's delicate chest. Andrew fought the terrifying command with every single shred of his human willpower. He gritted his teeth until he heard the dental enamel loudly crack. The sheer, violent friction between his conscious mind and the digital neural override caused blood to violently burst from the tiny capillaries in his eyes, streaming down his pale cheeks in thick, dark crimson tears. He was trapped as a screaming, helpless passenger inside his own body. "Run!" Andrew choked out, hot blood spilling heavily from his lips. "Run from me!" But Lyra did not step back. She did not raise a glowing hand to defend herself. The fierce, terrifying power she had used to crush the elite strike team remained completely dormant. Instead, she walked calmly toward the trembling barrel of his lethal weapon. Her beautiful face held absolutely no fear, only a profound, infinite sadness. She reached out and placed her soft hands gently over his violently shaking, bleeding fingers. The cold metal of the heavy gun pressed directly against her glowing heart. She smiled, a radiant, incredibly peaceful expression that utterly defied the total darkness of their reality. "You stepped into the dark when everyone else turned away," Lyra whispered softly. Her melodic voice, steady and full of an ancient, overwhelming grace. "I swore the eternal bond of the sacred life debt. My breath is your breath. My strength is your strength. I told you, Andrew Arroyo, this biological life belongs entirely to you. You do not need to fight anymore." The violently shaking barrel of the heavy plasma rifle dug deep into the fragile, glowing skin of Lyra's chest. Andrew fought the terrifying digital command with his entire soul, his muscles tearing and his blood vessels bursting under the sheer strain of his resistance. From the shallow cut on her collarbone, a single, radiant drop of her luminescent blood welled up. It rolled slowly down the cold metal of the weapon and fell directly onto Andrew's violently trembling, blood-stained knuckle. The moment her profound, energy-rich biological fluid made physical contact with his open pores, an impossible biochemical chain reaction ignited at the cellular level. Her blood acted as a supreme solvent of pure life force, surging through his bloodstream like a tidal wave of righteous fire. It ruthlessly hunted down the synthetic corporate nanites and the malicious neural control malware deeply embedded in his brainstem. With a blinding flash of internal agony, the control chip inside his skull simply melted into harmless slag. The absolute enslavement of his mind shattered into a million useless digital pieces. Andrew gasped, sucking in a massive breath of air that finally belonged entirely to him. He roared with the raw, untamed fury of a chained beast breaking its iron collar. His arms, now completely his own, violently tore the heavy weapon away from her chest. With a devastating swing fueled by peak military adrenaline, he smashed the heavy stock of the rifle directly into the hidden holographic projector, disguised as the floor beneath them. The pristine white simulation instantly dissolved. The blinding light vanished, violently throwing them back into the freezing, shadowy reality of the central mainframe vault. The immense black server racks towered over them exactly as they had before, on the far side of the room. The heavily reinforced glass of the observation deck cracked loudly as the Supreme Chief Executive Officer recoiled in absolute terror. His pristine control tablet exploding in a shower of electrical sparks. On the massive primary terminal, the final layer of decryption finished rendering. The true nature of the corporate obsession spilled across the giant screen in glowing geometric patterns. Andrew stared at the twin helixes rotating before him. One was standard human DNA, fractured, degraded, and riddled with thousands of generational mutations. The other was Lyra's genetic code, a flawless, perfectly symmetrical masterpiece of biological architecture. The horrifying, ultimate truth struck him like a physical blow. Lyra and her peaceful people were not some bizarre alien species. They were human. They were the very first iteration of humanity. The ancient ancestors who had departed a dying Earth millions of years ago, evolving into absolute perfection out in the deep, untainted cosmos. The ruling elite of the medical corporation were not just hunting her to synthesize an immortality serum. They were systematically exterminating her race to bury the ultimate, humiliating truth. Current humanity was a failed, severely degenerated shadow of its glorious ancestors. The corporate masters could not stand the public knowledge that they were biologically inferior, broken mutations. Andrew's hands flew across the terminal with unmatched speed. Utilizing the absolute supreme administrative access he had forcefully ripped from the destroyed simulation core, he bypassed every single corporate firewall in the system. He compiled the agonizing history, the undeniable genetic evidence, and the vast records of the atrocious hunting campaigns. With one decisive strike on the console, he broadcast the entire unredacted truth on every open frequency across the galaxy. The data flooded every news network, every planetary Senate floor, and every civilian terminal in the core worlds. The undeniable proof of the corporate monstrosity was now permanent and completely public. Behind the cracked glass, the executive lost every ounce of his engineered calm. His face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated madness. Realizing his entire empire was collapsing in real time, he slammed his fist into a hidden emergency console. A deafening, apocalyptic siren ripped through the station. The artificial intelligence announced a critical overload in the main antimatter energy core. The executive was detonating the entire orbital facility to vaporize the evidence and silence the only two witnesses forever. The floor buckled violently as the foundational pillars of the station began to disintegrate. Massive slabs of metal rained from the high ceiling. Andrew and Lyra ran frantically toward the executive docking bay, where a single, sleek escape vessel sat fueled and ready. But the spatial integrity of the hangar was already collapsing. A massive structural bulkhead tore loose, threatening to crush the ship entirely and expose the bay to the cold vacuum of space. Lyra stepped forward, pushing herself past every known biological limit. She unleashed the absolute entirety of her internal energy. A colossal, blinding sphere of pure kinetic force erupted from her fragile body, catching the falling thousands of tons of metal and holding the tearing vacuum at bay. The effort instantly drained the luminous glow from her skin, leaving her pale, shaking, and collapsing to her knees. She was bleeding out her very life force to buy him the exact seconds needed to prime the launch thrusters. Andrew threw himself into the pilot seat and initiated the launch sequence. The engines roared to life. He looked back at Lyra, who was smiling weakly, ready to be consumed by the fire. He completely refused to accept her solitary sacrifice, ripping the thick, heavy neural interface cable from his own tactical suit, a cable designed to link his nervous system directly to military hardware. He lunged out of the cockpit. He grabbed Lyra and violently plunged the conductive needle directly into the base of her spine. The connection was instant and agonizing. Andrew forced his own biological electrical current, his sheer human willpower, directly into her failing energy matrix. He shared the catastrophic burden of the localized gravity field. Together, screaming in mutual agony and profound unity, they pushed the crushing metal away just far enough. Andrew dragged her into the cockpit, slamming the heavy blast doors shut as he hit the manual override. The sleek vessel shot out of the collapsing hangar bay like a silver bullet. Less than 2 seconds later, the main antimatter core of the station completely breached. A silent, colossal sphere of pure white fire swallowed the entire asteroid facility, expanding into the dark void and wiping the dark history from existence. Inside the quiet cabin of the escape ship, Andrew and Lyra lay breathing heavily on the floor. The gentle glow slowly returned to her skin, and the control chip was permanently gone from his mind. They looked out the reinforced viewport at the endless, untainted sea of stars before them. The heavy chains of their past were finally broken, opening the door to a truly free dawn for them both. Thank you so much to all our wonderful listeners for staying with us through this incredible journey. Where are you listening to our story from today? Please let us know in the comments below. If you found today's story engaging and want to help us keep this channel alive, please consider supporting us with just $1. You can easily do this by scanning the PayPal QR code currently on your screen, or by using the PayPal link provided in the video description or the pinned comment. Your generous support allows us to pay our hardworking team, helping them feed their families and empowering them to continue creating even more amazing stories for you to enjoy. Thank you again, and we will see you in the next adventure.